South Wales. The showers will be light across northern England, parts of Scotland, many places here dry, much of Northern Ireland dry, and the east coast also largely dry and fine. But again, there will be a lot of cloud and temperatures high teens, low 20s. Still a few of those heavy showers around on Friday evening. Could be dropping a lot of rain in a short space of time, so could cause a few issues, particularly so on the roads. As we go into the weekend, those weather fronts we talked about earlier out west will be moving in with low pressure, so some wet and increasingly windy weather to the northwest, but staying mostly dry and getting warm once more across parts of the southeast.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me. Noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV. On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
And welcome once again to On the Money, where we're focused as ever on the UK's cost of living crisis, helping you to beat the squeeze. I'm Liam Halligan, and over the next hour we'll be talking about the looming economic policy battle at the top of British politics. Should taxes be cut, as Liz Truss argues, or would that be too risky, as Rishi Sunak says? Who's right on tax, Rishi or Liz? This matters, of course, as one of them will soon be our new Prime Minister. So who's going to get the upper hand in this ongoing Tory tax tussle? And what will be the outcome for you? On the Money, after the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Liam, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss have begun their head-to-head battle to become the next Prime Minister. The former Chancellor and the current Foreign Secretary are the final two contenders after Penny Mordaunt was eliminated yesterday. They'll now take part in a series of hustings and live TV debates over the summer. More than 160,000 Conservative Party members will then decide who should take over from Boris Johnson, with voting open until the 2nd of September. Ms Truss told GB News if she becomes Prime Minister, the Tory party will win the next election.
What people right across Britain care about is how we are going to help them with the cost of living, how we're going to unleash opportunity. And I'm somebody who can get things done in government, I've shown that I'm willing to push things through Whitehall, and that's why we need to cut taxes. We shouldn't have raised national insurance in the first place. We need to cut it now. We need a moratorium on the green energy levy to cut people's fuel bills. And we need to power recovery by attracting investment, getting new businesses to set up.
While Shadow Justice Secretary Steve Reid told GB News both candidates represent everything that's wrong with Boris Johnson's government.
We've ended up with two continuity candidates, both of them senior figures in Boris Johnson's government, and both of them up to their necks in every single mistake that he made, every tax hike that he imposed. So it doesn't make any difference which one of them becomes leader in the end, because they both represent the same record of failure, mismanagement and covering up, frankly, for all of the lies and law breaking that was going on under Boris Johnson.
The Home Office's handling of the Channel's small boat crisis has been deemed ineffectual by a watchdog report. The Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration has called for a more strategic response to migrant crossings. David Neal wrote in his report the Home Office response exposed gaps in security procedures, leaving vulnerable migrants at risk. The BBC has agreed to pay substantial damages to the former nanny of Prince William and Harry. It's over false and malicious allegations about her which were used to obtain Martin Bashir's 1995 Panorama interview with Princess Diana. Tiggy Legg-Burke also received a public apology from the BBC at the High Court in London. Her solicitor said the allegations had caused serious personal consequences for all concerned. Soaring inflation has pushed the UK's budget deficit to its highest level since April last year. The Office for National Statistics says public sector borrowing rose to almost £23 billion, up from £12.5 billion in May. It's the second highest June borrowing since records began. Chancellor Nadeem Zahawi, though, says the government is on track to get debt down. Major cultural change is needed to reduce the number of drug deaths in Scotland. That's according to a new 3-year study. The report issued by the Drugs Deaths Task Force urges authorities to move their approach away from punishment and towards care. It also says a UK-wide change in law is needed to allow safe consumption rooms and reduce fatalities. In 2020, there were more than 1,300 drug-related deaths in Scotland, higher than in any other European country. Angela Constance, SNP Minister for Drug Policy, says we have to follow the evidence.
This is where we need to be bold and brave and follow the evidence. And the evidence internationally and from around the world shows that while safe drug consumption rooms are not a silver bullet, because nothing is, but they do help to save lives. So we know what works, we just need to get on and do it. And that's about that whole system of care and support for people that are most marginalised and excluded in our society.
Reports of crime in England and Wales have reached a 20-year high. Data from the Office for National Statistics shows that 6.3 million offences were recorded in the year to March, with a sharp rise in fraud, rape and violent attacks. Knife crime, theft and domestic abuse also increased. The Home Office says the figures are likely to reflect improved crime recording. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has announced the UK sending hundreds of drones and anti-tank weapons to Ukraine to help fend off Russian missile strikes. It comes as the Ministry of Defence says Moscow's forces are looking to advance on Ukraine's second largest power plant, 50 kilometres northeast of Donetsk. It's thought Russia could be targeting the power station as part of its offensive towards the cities of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though it's back to Liam with On the Money.
Coming up on The Money today, tax cuts or tax rises? It's the question dominating this ongoing Tory leadership contest. A question that will loom large over the economy in the weeks to come. So who's right? Tax cutter Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak, who says such cuts would be too risky? As ever, On the Money holds a detailed discussion. Plus, postal workers are the latest to threaten strikes after union members voted overwhelmingly to back industrial action. But will such strikes go ahead? On the Money talks exclusively to the Communication Workers Union at the heart of this dispute. And each day on The Money features an in-depth Money Talks interview. Well, today we meet Mark Bogard. He runs the Family Building Society and the Building Societies Association. With over 30 years' experience in financial services and an expert in mortgages, we discuss the state of the UK housing market with a genuine industry insider. That's later in the show. So email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @GBNews. Let me know what you think about the issues raised in today's On The Money. I'll read out some of your messages later in the show, so stay with us because this is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan and you're On The Money. So it's Rishi Sunak versus Liz Truss in the race to become the next Tory leader and, of course, our Prime Minister. A massive policy battle's now on. Former Chancellor Sunak says cutting taxes now would be inflationary, making the cost of living crisis worse. But Foreign Secretary Truss insists if she becomes Prime Minister, she'll cut taxes sharpish, which, with the tax take heading for its highest since the Second World War, would no doubt be welcomed by thousands of cash-strapped companies and millions of households. Throughout this Tory leadership contest, Sunak and Truss have been at loggerheads, and their tax policy tussle will now dominate politics for the rest of the summer as Tory party members across Britain decide who to back, with the new Prime Minister being announced in early September. Sunak's already legislated to raise corporation tax from 19 to 25% next year. The Foreign Secretary says no, saying this business tax should stay where it is. Truss also wants to reverse April's rise in national insurance, seen by many as a tax on jobs. Finally, Liz Truss says that green levies on household utility bills should be suspended. They currently account for around a quarter of our household electricity bills. Sunak's accused Truss of following fantasy economics, of unfunded promises. He says tax cuts are unaffordable and by boosting demand would push up inflation even more. The Sunak camp today points to new government borrowing figures, which they should say show the public finances are too weak to withstand tax cuts. And here they are. New figures show the government borrowed £22.9 billion last month, the highest amount of any June on record. Last June, despite months of lockdown, government borrowing was lower at £18.9 billion. Official data shows that the government paid out more than £19 billion on debt interest last month, suggesting, say the Sunak camp, that yet more borrowing will be counterproductive, though other economists say this high debt interest figure is misleading and current debt payments are actually much lower. In sum, Truss has promised a whopping £38 billion of tax cuts in a bid to swing those 160,000 or so Tory party members her way. My tax cuts will decrease inflation, she says. Sunak says Truss has succumbed to a Treasury orthodoxy that's failed to deliver growth. The former Chancellor, meanwhile, accuses Truss of something-for-nothing economics. So should we cut tax to boost growth? Or would that mean taking too much of a risk with our public finances? Tax cut or rise, stick or twist? And that's our On The Money question today. Who's right on tax? Rishi or Liz? Grown-up conversations with people who know their stuff. That's what we do here on The Money. And talking of which, on the show today, James Chiavarani. He is owner of the London-based Italian restaurant Il Portico. We always try and feature small business owners here on The Money. Independent economist Julian Jessup, formerly of Her Majesty's Treasury. Julian, great to have you with us as ever. And she's back in the studio, founder of MoneyMagpie.com. Getting here in the nick of time, it's Jasmine Birtle. It's great to have you with us. Let's talk to you first, James. You are on the front line of business. You run a small restaurant in London, a very well-known restaurant, a very successful restaurant over the years, Il Portico. You're paying those business rates, you're meeting payroll, you're trying to get staff, and now you're about to be walloped from next April with an increase in corporation tax from 19 to 25%. What say you, sir?
Nothing.
I think James is just frozen there. We will just try and get him back up in one moment. Sorry about that. A Wi-Fi problem. So let's go back to Julian Jessup. Julian, you've been writing in the papers today, you're a very influential economist, that in your view, that Treasury figure of 19 odd billion pound debt interest payments in June alone, it sounds absolutely horrendous. Gosh, 19 billion quid, that's the equivalent of 2.5% on the basic rate of income tax, a huge amount of money. You say that number's misleading, don't you? And the public finances are actually stronger than they look.
Yes, I think there are 2 key points. I mean, first of all, that 19.4 billion figure, almost all of that is something to do with the way that we finance what are called inflation index linked gilt. So this is basically government borrowing, where the amount of money that you get back at the end of the term of the bond is linked to what's happened to inflation in the meantime. Now, I know that's a bit geeky, but what that means in practice is that almost all of this 19.4 billion is not actually money that the government paid out last month. It's money that the government are going to have to pay out over the next several years and indeed decades when the individual bonds mature. So I think it's a bit misleading to say the government paid out 19.4 billion. The true figure it paid out last month was more like 3 billion. The rest is being added to the longer term debt pile when the cost of paying it down is going to be a lot lower.
Truss is right, Julian. I mean, you are formerly of the Treasury. You're an extremely experienced person in public policy. She says Rishi Sunak, he's basically been taken captive by the Treasury, who are always over cautious. He needs to show a bit more entrepreneurial vim. We can add that massive COVID era debt, 400 billion quid, says Liz Truss. We can treat it like a kind of war loan and pay it back over decades. We can treat it rather differently, and the markets that finance government borrowing, of course, would accept that. Is Liz Truss right? Is the Treasury wrong?
I think on this occasion she is right. I mean, to be fair to Rishi Sunak, he himself favours tax cuts, but just not yet. That said, he himself at the beginning of this month was trumpeting what he described as the biggest single cut in personal taxes in more than 25 years, which was the increase in the national insurance threshold. So it's a bit odd to be saying you can't cut taxes because you're worried about the impact of inflation when you've just done that yourself. The reality is that I think there is plenty of fiscal room in the public finances at the moment. It is true that higher inflation is pushing up the cost of servicing debt, but that's a longer term issue. In the short term, it's actually helping the public finances because the Treasury is raising a lot more money than anticipated from higher incomes and higher prices. So inflation actually creates an opportunity to cut taxes because it boosts the Treasury's coffers.
That's right. We had a report earlier this week, didn't we, from the Centre for Economic Business Research, the parish of Vicky Price, who often appears on this show, saying that, yes, inflation does mean that the public sector pay bill goes up a bit, but it also means the government gets more pound notes in, if you like, through VAT and other taxes. Jasmine, let's turn to you. Why is Rishi Sunak doing this? He portrays himself as a Thatcherite. Yes, of course, there are some votes in being prudent with the public finances. Famously, no one likes, for instance, if Labour play fast and loose with the public finances, and the Labour Party history of the last 20, 30 years has all been about rebuilding that credibility on the economy. But is Rishi Sunak overdoing the hair-shirtedness? Does it make sense to you to raise corporation tax from 19 to 25% next year, by which time we hope businesses will be boosting the economy?
Well, no, it doesn't. And I agree with Liz Truss, personally. I think that we should cut taxes. We should cut personal taxes, cut business taxes to increase growth. When you increase growth, you increase tax take. So I don't think that it is a risky idea. I mean, frankly, anything we do right at the moment is risky, but I don't think it's any more risky than what Rishi Sunak is suggesting. And frankly, I'm not that impressed by what Rishi Sunak has done in the last 2 or 3 years. So what he's now saying, we've got to hold everything together, I don't think he has the right idea. I think we have to be bold. I don't think we have a choice.
Let's see if we can go back to James Chiavarani in Il Portico restaurant in London there. James, sorry, I think there's an issue with the Wi-Fi or something. Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah. Hopefully
fantastic,
you can hear me now,
fantastic. I just wanted to get a sense from the business front line. You do run a very well-known restaurant, but of course you've got those business rates, you've got those payroll taxes, national insurance increases. You're part of the hospitality sector, hammered by lockdown, of course. So what do you think of the fact that under Rishi Sunak's plans, in fact, he's legislated for it already, corporation tax is going to go up from 19 to 25%. Is that going to harm your business?
I mean, all taxation harms business in the short term, but to make a very valid point, I've never minded paying tax on my profits. I don't mind paying higher tax on corporation tax because it means that that money's already been banked and I've made money on that. So then that's fair enough that I can pay tax on that. What I do mind and what businesses really need is lower taxes coming through the door before you even start. So business rates, for example, national insurance and VAT. I mean, VAT was typically always 17.5%, and I think even 15% was fair for everybody. That jump up to 20% is the one that really kills you, because that stops you from even getting to profit. Let us get to profit first, and then we can share the fruits of our labour with the government.
There we have Julian Jessup, James Chiaviorani describing in specific terms his business, what nerdy economists like you and I might call the Laffer curve. The idea, named, of course, after the famous American economist Arthur Laffer, the idea that if you raise tax rates, you can actually end up with less tax revenue because you kill off some of the activity. Surely, if the Laffer curve applies when businesses are trying to recover from lockdown, not least in the hospitality sector, it seems to me ridiculous to whack them with extra corporation tax. Could the Laffer curve work in practice?
Well, if the Laffer curve is ever going to work, it's surely now, when we're one of the few countries to be raising taxes in the midst of a global economic crisis, a cost of living crisis, and it does significantly increase the risk that the UK economy is tipped into recession. So even if tax cuts cost a bit of money to the Treasury in the short term, I'd still say it was worth doing as sort of insurance policy about preventing a steep recession, which would be far more damaging to the economy and the public finances in the longer term. So I would err on the side of being bolder, as I think Liz Truss is suggesting, and being willing to do more to support the economy, to help with the cost of living, and also, of course, to use tax cuts in ways that actually boost the supply side of the economy, and actually in the process of doing so would actually reduce inflation rather than increase it.
The three of our panellists today, Jasmine, you included, you seem to be sort of temperamentally on Team Truss at the moment. So let me just push back. Look, literally as we speak, there's turmoil on markets in Italy. Mario Draghi, the Prime Minister of Italy, has tendered his resignation. Sergio Mattarelli, the Italian president, is going to be forced to accept it. At a time when financial markets are turbulent, should the British state really be taking on more borrowing? Because even if the Laffer curve works and we do end up with more tax revenue from lower rates in the end, it takes a while, doesn't it? We'll end up borrowing a little bit more in the interim. So surely there's something in what Rishi Sunak's saying.
Well, yeah, caution is always worth considering, definitely. But again, I do think that even, in fact, possibly because of the turmoil in the financial and economic markets across the globe, we need to be bolder. I think that this is a time not for caution, but for bold action, because, as Julian's pointed out, otherwise we have a big danger of a recession. And that, I think, is the big thing that we do need to avoid if we at all can.
Well, there you have it. Certainly the view from the On the Money studio here is that when it comes to Rishi and Liz has the upper hand in this tax debate, but this is going to run all the way to September the 5th when the new Prime Minister's identity is revealed, among the decision, of course, of those 160,000 odd Tory members across the country. And it's a debate that's going to go on for months after that, even years. Should we cut taxes? Or should we be raising taxes? Thanks so much to Julian Jessup, former Treasury economist, and indeed James Chiaviorani of Il Portico, the Italian restaurant in London. Great to hear from both of you, and you'll be back soon. Jasmine Birtles is staying with us. So this is On the Money with me, Liam Halligan. After the break, we'll be hearing from the Communication Workers Union. They represent over 100,000 Royal Mail workers, on why the majority of those, the vast majority, have voted to go on strike. But will those strikes take place? Stay with us. You're On the Money.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
And welcome back. It's 1:23 on GB News TV, DAB plus digital radio and online, and you're on the money. Now, more and more workers have, of course, been on or are threatening strike action amid concerns that pay is being outstripped by inflation as this cost of living crisis gets worse. We've seen rail staff, barristers, bus drivers on strike, with doctors now threatening industrial action as well. So too are postal workers, after more than 115,000 Royal Mail staff overwhelmingly voted to back strike action, as On the Money reported yesterday. That was after Royal Mail offered postal workers a pay rise averaging 5.5%. Well, let's hear from Andy Fury. He's Assistant Secretary at the Communication Workers Union, the trade union representing thousands of Royal Mail workers, very much at the centre of these negotiations. And still with me in the studio is Jasmine Birtles, founder of MoneyMagpie.com. Andy, very good to have you on the show. Thanks for appearing on The Money. 5.5%, it's a lot more than many other workers are getting. That's what Royal Mail's offered you.
Good afternoon, but no, they haven't offered our members 5.5. It's certainly not a pay rise. They've imposed 2% into our members' pay packets, and they're claiming that there is extra money available linked to the major change programme that we are also balloting for strike action on. So it's completely spurious to say that it's a 5.5% pay rise. And our members know that. They're not stupid, they're intelligent people, and that's why they voted in such overwhelming numbers for strike action.
You've got the mandate, the democratic mandate for the strike in your back pocket after 97% plus of those balloted, a high turnout, 77% of staff took part in that ballot on industrial action. So no one can say you haven't got the right to strike, of course, Andy. But just, you know, a lot of our viewers and listeners rely on the post office, rely on Royal Mail. When might those strikes happen and how likely are they, do you think?
Well, first and foremost, I'd like to reassure the viewers that strike action is an absolute last resort. Our members don't want to go on strike. Forced into this position by the actions and the attitude of the Royal Mail board. We've got a Royal Mail board that's raking in the money, significant bonus payments, massive salaries for all the top people, and yet they can't find enough money for our members. And you know, it's worth reminding viewers that only in January Royal Mail board paid £400 million to the shareholders, so they've got the money available to be able to reach a reasonable and fair agreement in today's economic crisis.
Isn't Royal Mail itself going through a bit of an existential crisis, Andy? You know the post office better than I ever will. It's been a huge part of your life. But it seems to me, as somebody who's looking on from the outside, that, of course, physical mail is being used less and less. The parcel side of your industry, of course, is being challenged by many, many other pretty efficient companies. Isn't it a question of make inefficiency savings, or the whole service could be under threat, of course, which would be terrible for your tens of thousands of members in the end? Isn't it just reality that Royal Mail is going to be pretty cash-strapped for a while?
Well, they actually just declared a profit of 758 million for the last year. So they're not cash-strapped. Look, we want to ensure job security for our members, but we have got a thriving industry. In actual fact, during the pandemic, revenue increased significantly. Now, that's gone back a bit because there's less reliance on home deliveries through parcels. But the reality is that Royal Mail is a thriving, successful company, and that success has been delivered by our members, and our members deserve a share in that success.
And finally, Andy, I just want to get this from the horse's mouth. Forgive me, but I just want your expert confirmation on this. Will these planned strikes, as and when they happen, if and when they happen, of course, because it's still in the balance, depending on your negotiations, will they affect post offices and sub-post offices? Because, of course, a lot of our viewers and listeners will be worried about things like collecting their pensions and accessing other vital services.
Well, in actual fact, we've got separate view with the post office, and there has been 3 strikes from post office workers. The most recent one was Thursday, the 14th of July. Further strikes are planned, but we are hoping to get into ACAS negotiations or talk to ACAS to try and resolve that dispute. So the post office is publicly owned by government. The Royal Mail is a private company since the separation in 2012. So they are separate organisations. The post office and the CW are in dispute, and that dispute will continue. There was a pay freeze imposed for 2021 in the post office. In Mail, we've now got a separate dispute with the numbers that you've provided in terms of a 97.6% yes vote. We've also got our members in BT and Openreach that are in dispute with the employer, and they're due to take strike action at the end of next week and the week after. So the CW have disputes going on. What we're trying to ensure is that all of our members get a better deal, and all of the companies we deal with can afford to pay our members a much better deal.
Andy Furia, thank you for your time. You are Assistant General Secretary at the CWU, and let's talk as and when this dispute develops further. But for now, thanks for appearing here on The Money. Let's hear from Royal Mail. They gave us a statement, which I think we can see now. Despite nearly 3 months of talks, say Royal Mail, the CWU, that's the Communication Workers Union, have not engaged in any meaningful discussion on the changes we need to make to adapt, says a spokesperson for Royal Mail. In the event of industrial action, we have contingency plans to minimise customer disruption. Briefly, let's turn to Jasmine Birtles. What do you make of this? It's part of a pattern, of course. Bus drivers, barristers, BMA, the doctors' union, saying strike action is now imminent. It will be a pretty big deal if one of the biggest, most powerful unions in Britain, over 100,000 members, the CWU, says all out.
Yeah, it would. But I think a lot of people would understand it, because the cost of living crisis, the inflation that we're all dealing with, is so much far ahead of the wages that people have. For example, research today by ASDA has found that half of parents are saying they're having to borrow money from friends and family to pay for the summer holidays for their kids. And this is just sort of basic stuff. So when so many people are unable to cope with day-to-day costs, it's not surprising that many of these areas of workers will say, right, if we're not given a significant pay rise to cope with day-to-day costs, then we're going to strike. It's not nice, but hey, it's understandable.
And a lot of the commentary this week has been that average wages across the economy, about 4-5%, the average public sector pay rise. And we often hear, don't we, that public sector pay hasn't gone up as fast as private sector pay. But What we don't hear is that public sector pay is still higher on average than private sector pay. And of course, public sector workers, they often get those gold-plated workplace pensions, more sick pay. Yeah, it's not easy for everyone in the public sector. That's not what I'm saying. But a lot of private sector workers, they can't get any kind of pay rise.
No, absolutely. And private sector includes a lot of very small businesses which are already struggling. I mean, we heard about, Il Portico restaurant. I don't know how well he's doing, but obviously he's got rising costs.
Big time.
So when the staff are asking for higher pay as well, he probably wants to. I mean, I know I've increased pay for my workers, but, there's only so far you can go when you're a small business. So, yeah, I think it is quite unfair, actually, for private sector workers there.
Jasmine, great to have you with us today, and we'll see you here on The Money next time. Jasmine Birtles there, founder of moneymagpie.com. This is On The Money with me, Liam Halligan. Coming up, we'll be hearing why thousands of households across the UK are seeking compensation because they feel, they say, like, quotes, prisoners to excessively high interest rates on their mortgage. That's to come after the GB News headlines. Once more with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Liam. It's 1:32. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss have begun their head-to-head battle to become the next Prime Minister. The former Chancellor and the current Foreign Secretary are the final two contenders after Penny Mordaunt was eliminated yesterday. More than 160,000 Conservative Party members will now decide who should take over from Boris Johnson. Liz Truss told GB News she'll correct mistakes of the past.
Need to cut taxes. We shouldn't have raised national insurance in the first place. We need to cut it now. We need a moratorium on the green energy levy to cut people's fuel bills. And we need to power recovery.
Meanwhile, Boris Johnson could face a by-election to remain as an MP if an inquiry rules he lied to Parliament over the Partygate scandal. Commons Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle has confirmed that if he's suspended from the Commons for 10 days or more, he could face a recall petition. Boris Johnson would be able to stand in any resulting by-election. The BBC has agreed to pay substantial damages to the former nanny of Princes William and Harry. It's over false and malicious allegations about her used to obtain Martin Bashir's 1995 Panorama interview with Princess Diana. Tiggy Legg-Burke also received a public apology from the BBC at the High Court in London. The Home Office's handling of the Channel's small boat crisis has been deemed ineffectual by a watchdog report. The independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration has called for a more strategic response to migrant crossings. David Neal says the Home Office response exposed gaps in security procedures, leaving vulnerable migrants at risk. Reports of crime in England and Wales have reached a 20-year high. Data from the Office for National Statistics shows that 6.3 million offences were recorded in the year to March, with a sharp rise in fraud, rape and violent attacks. The Home Office says the figures are likely to reflect improved crime recording. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy $1.192 and 1.169 euros. The price of gold currently stands at £1,411.67 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for real-time investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
And welcome back. You're on the money. It's 1:37 now. If you have a mortgage, you may be struggling with excessively high interest rates. And what does this mean for people who are legally locked into a home loan with no means to make the monthly payments? This is a situation thousands of homeowners across the UK say they are finding themselves in, with claimants calling themselves, quote, mortgage prisoners, spanning from Cornwall to Cumbria and beyond. Earlier this week, TSB Bank faced legal action stemming from buying £3.3 billion worth of mortgages from Northern Rock 6 years ago, with approximately 200 homeowners whose mortgages were administered by TSB's Whistletree brand, issuing claims for around £50,000 each in overpaid interest. And that's serious money. Joining me now to discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome Matthew Patching. He's Senior Associate at Harkers Parker Solicitors, who represent a majority of these claimants seeking compensation from TSB. Good to have you with us. Now, this is, in some senses, this is kind of ancient history, wasn't it? Because back in the global financial crisis in 2008, of course, Northern Rock went bust. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people had mortgages with Northern Rock. And I remember at the time, some of those mortgages were ported over, if you like, taken on by TSB to try and minimise disruption, angst, worry, concern among the people who held those home loans. In your view, representing these people taking a mass class action, what's gone wrong?
Well, I think part of the problem is that these people weren't ported over to necessarily relieve angst. It was a commercial decision taken by TSB to buy these loans, in part because they thought they could charge more to these people if they couldn't get away. There's a question of whether people can remortgage elsewhere, which is really a question of circumstance. Quite often people took out mortgages before the crash in what were more relaxed lending conditions. And lots of people were able to borrow money and were really good borrowers, good in inverted commas. But after the crash, there was a sort of regulatory shift and it became more difficult to borrow money. And so you end up in a circumstance where people are trapped. What we say went wrong, I think, is that TSB acted as though its Whistletree book of mortgages was an inactive lender. It refused to offer new rates to these people,
right?
And instead charged a very high standard variable.
So they can't, as many viewers and listeners will know, if you've got a mortgage, you can often, if there are onerous terms, you can buy your way out, you can renegotiate, and indeed people should be negotiating with their mortgage providers, right? It should be a kind of active, ongoing situation. So in your view, we must be very careful legally here, of course, an active case. In your view, Matthew, why has TSB been unreasonable? Surely if you went into a mortgage with Northern Rock, is it that TSB have changed the terms? Is it that they've changed the legal contract that those mortgage purchasers, the homeowners, took out with Northern Rock?
Yeah, well, it's sort of the opposite of that, in that the terms haven't changed at all, and the terms require that the the bank or the bank that bought the mortgages from Northern Rock charges its standard variable rate to our clients.
Right.
TSB didn't do that. It has a standard variable rate.
Oh, I see.
It's been about 2.5%.
So you should have taken on the standard variable rate of the new institution, which is throughout this massively low interest rate, ultra low interest rate environment since 2010, these people with Northern Rock mortgages, they've been paying pre-financial crisis levels of interest, like 4, 5, 6%, rather than 1, 2, 3%.
Yeah, exactly. So what?
Crikey. That'll put a taste in your mouth, wouldn't it? No wonder they're angry.
It sort of terrifies you, doesn't it, to think of paying 6% over the last 6 years. It's just not normal, and people are seeing that now. Cost of living and interest rates going up, and people are sort of terrified of rates going back where they were.
What happens now, Matthew? You're a lawyer, highly trained professional. Law firms often help people in these class actions. It's a very legitimate thing to do. Some people would say laudable. But what happens now? Where could this case go? What's the time frame?
Well, unfortunately, things tend to move quite slowly, particularly in big cases. We think it'll probably take 2 or 3 years to reach a trial if we get that far. It's not necessary that it will get that far, but if it does, what happens immediately next is that there'll be a hearing of what's called a group litigation order application, and that's just a court process to group all the claims together. So it's more like an American class action.
Wow, it's a very complicated case, isn't it? How unusual is this case? Would it be breaking new legal ground?
I think it would certainly be the first case brought at this scale on behalf of mortgage prisoners, because of course mortgage prisoners are a bigger class of people than just the TSB Whistletree group. Northern Rock's mortgages, as you said, were sort of scattered to the four winds, and there are lots of institutions currently holding these mortgages and treating them as mortgage prisoners.
And just remind us once again, how many people are involved potentially in this class action?
So in the TSB case, about 27,000.
27,000 households.
It's lots of people.
Absolutely, a huge responsibility.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Matthew Patching of Harkers Parker, it's been very interesting to talk to you, and let us know how this case continues as it develops. Now, we did, of course, ask TSB to come on and discuss this, but they declined. In a statement, though, they told GB News, "We're committed to treating our Whistletree customers fairly. TSB took ownership of the Whistletree mortgages in 2016 and subsequently created access to product transfers to customers who did not previously have access to them. Since then, over 2/3 of Whistletree customers have either transferred to a new Whistletree product or closed their mortgage with Whistletree. We write to customers twice a year to remind them about the opportunity to switch." A case that will rumble on, I'm sure. Now, just a few days ago, the UK was experiencing, of course, uncomfortably hot temperatures, and it's still pretty sweltering now. But we had the hottest day ever recorded on Tuesday at over 40 degrees. And with extreme heat waves ripping through Britain, water companies are seeing an unprecedented spike in usage. Our East of England reporter, Ed Crawford, has been investigating.
The British public are making the most of the sunny weather during the current heatwave. But fun in the sun often comes with increasing need for water, and that higher demand is increasing pressure on the UK's water suppliers.
With the UK experiencing a heatwave at the moment, there's been an increased demand for water. That's why I've come to Graffham Reservoir to speak to Anglia Water and understand how are they rising to the challenges.
Nicola Harvey, spokesperson at Anglia Water, has definitely seen a change in recent weeks.
We're seeing a lot more demand on our services, about 35% increase on our normal demand. So normally we'd put about 1.1 billion litres of water into our supply every day. That's gone up to about 1.4, 1.5 billion litres. So that demand is putting a lot of pressure on our networks. So the reason for the increase in demand is obviously there's hot weather, people are using more water, taking more showers, using paddling pools and things like that in the garden. So that's what's causing that increase.
During the cost of living crisis, people in the UK are seeing rising water rates and an increased demand on suppliers, so the customer is feeling the heat. However, there are ways to conserve water.
So our main top tips for conserving water are, if you're going to use the paddling pool, which obviously we want people to enjoy themselves in this lovely warm weather, is to reuse that water. So use that water to water the plants in the garden, to wash your car. If you're taking a shower, take a slightly shorter shower. Just be really mindful of the water that you're using, just to help us with that demand of increase that we're seeing at the moment.
Grafton is one of Anglia Water's largest reservoirs with a circumference of around 16 kilometres. Whilst there isn't a risk of the reservoir drying up right now, if heat waves become more common, the need to conserve water will become even greater. Ed Crawford, GB News.
Ed Crawford there in the east of England. Time now for my daily interview series, Money Talks. And today I'm joined by Mark Bogard. He's Chief Executive of the Family Building Society and he's Chair of the Building Societies Association. Mark's a trained lawyer with over 30 years' experience in financial services, including senior mortgage broker roles as well as building societies. And with house prices rising to a new record for the 6th consecutive month and first-time buyers facing a 20% rise in mortgage payments as interest rates go up, it's definitely a challenging time across the housing market, not least for those trying to get on the property ladder. So let's hear from a genuine industry insider, Mark Bogard, Chair of the Building Societies Association, my latest guest on Money Talks. With us, as I say, a genuine industry insider, enormously experienced. What would you say to people watching and listening to On the Money today about the state of the housing market, where we are historically in your long experience?
So the housing market has always gone up or down. It's gone up for a long time. People have got very used to very low interest rates, and those very low interest rates are like being on an opiate drug. It's like heroin, and coming off that is very difficult and very painful, and we're just starting to see that. So we've seen interest rates go up a bit. They're forecast to go up more on the 4th of August and be, the market thinks there's a 75% chance there'll be 3% by the end of the year.
Which, of course, means standard variable mortgage rates are more like 4 or 5%, right?
Yes, and most people these days are on fixed rates, so more than 90% of people are on fixed rates. But a lot of people, particularly younger people, will get a 2-year fixed rate. That time goes very quickly. And a few months ago, you could get 88 mortgages at less than 1%. That world's completely gone now.
Wow.
So when people come to replace those mortgages, they might be at 3% or 4% or 5%. And people quite rightly have spent a lot of time talking about energy costs, but the difference in people's mortgage payments will be very significant. That will inevitably have an impact on the housing market, because when people go and see a mortgage broker, they tend not to talk about how much they can borrow, but what their monthly payment can be. So someone will turn up, see a mortgage broker and say, look, I can afford X pounds a month. How much can I borrow?
Yeah. Now, when I was a lad, and you too, Mark, the High Street, many building societies, the Abbey National, the Halifax TSB I was just discussing. Then we had the so-called demutualisations, didn't we? There are far fewer building societies around today. The Nationwide springs to mind, and of course there's lots of regional ones too. Do you regret the fact that there are fewer building societies around? Because there is a different ethos to a building society, isn't there? Or at least there should be, that they work for their members. They work more like mutuals. They're not charities, of course, but they're maybe not quite as hard-nosed as some of the banks who lend people money.
So there are 43 building societies left. There are lots of credit unions, which are also mutual. We don't have any shareholders, and there's lots of evidence. If you deposit money with a building society, you will get more on average than with a bank. The building societies, particularly the smaller ones, will do loans to people that the big lenders, particularly the big six, are not interested in. So we do lots of loans to older people into later life lending. We do lots of more complicated loans for younger people. And if you're the big six, you just can't be bothered to do that because you just want to put stuff through a machine. So diversity in financial services is as important as diversity in any other aspect of life.
How can we... I really believe that we've lost something. That's why I was so interested to meet you with building societies. Of course, they're still important, but they're not nearly as big a presence as they were for today's generation of youngsters and indeed older people who are trying to raise money. What can we do to salvage and even bolster our mutual sector?
So what you said isn't quite true.
Okay.
So during the pandemic, actually, there was a period where the building societies were by far the biggest suppliers of mortgage lending.
Okay.
Today, we sort of oscillate between about a sort of a quarter and a third.
Yeah,
of the
maybe at the margin, of course.
Yeah.
But the stock of outstanding loans, it's overwhelmingly with non-mutuals these days.
Yes, that's absolutely true. But look, if I can't compete with HSBC or Barclays, so if you absolutely want the cheapest loan, then HSBC. If you're a bit more complicated, you've got a bit of a story to tell.
Self-employed, maybe.
Self-employed, you've got two sources of income, you're a slightly complicated family, then a mutual will listen to your story because so we underwrite, we have humans who look at each loan, not a computer. And that's really important, and people value that. And so people think better of mutuals than they do of shareholder-owned banks. It's just a fact. So we do everything that we can. But those demutualisations were driven by a set of factors, often the remuneration of the people running them.
Indeed, I remember it well. Now, of course, a lot of people who work in the mutual sector, like you, they really believe in home ownership and the spreading of wealth and so on. You're obviously not a house builder in any way. You fund people trying to buy houses that are increasingly expensive. Do you think we've lost something here in the UK? The fact that the share of 25 to 34-year-olds who own a home has gone down from well over 40% when I first bought a home in the late 90s to around 20% now.
Absolutely. So the thing that this country most lacks, and we're trying to do something about it, I was talking to politicians last week, is an integrated housing policy. So there is no integrated housing policy in the UK. Politicians do a whole series of short-term actions, many of which pull in a completely different direction. So, for example, a lot of money's been spent on Help to Buy, which was supposed to help young people buy a home. All that did was push up house prices.
It's madness.
And ended up with huge bonuses being paid to people in house builders. That money should simply have been spent on building new homes.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a supply-side problem. We need to build many, many more homes. And the other thing is we need to make better use of the housing stock. So people focus on new build, but less than 1% of the total housing stock is built each year. Using the other 99% in the best way possible, and stamp duty bungs the whole thing up. So old people tell us they don't downsize because of stamp duty.
I completely agree with you. I mean, you may know I've written a book on housing, home truths. I've talked to politicians about this, on all sides of the political aisle often. I did get a sense that the Tories were going to grab hold of this. Michael Gove was making some really interesting noises about the state building more social homes, about maybe forcing developers to use their planning permissions. Many planning permissions that the big developers get, they just sit on them and don't use them for years and years and years to sort of contrive scarcity. Do you see anything among our political class and indeed our media class that reassures you we will ultimately get our arms around this problem? Because home ownership, it is at the sort of centre of the British psyche, isn't it? It's part of the British dream. But for many young people watching and listening to this show, it's a nightmare.
So housing matters to everyone in the country every night when they go to bed. However, there have been 20 housing ministers in the last 22 years. They come and talk to the Building Societies Association often. The first thing they say is, I'm in it for the long term. You know that 12 months later it's not going to... So they have to find a way to think about this long term. They need to get a group of people together to think about it long term. Because if you're the housing minister for the next 10 months, what you think is completely irrelevant because you're gone and the next guy turns up. So that's why we have this higgledy-piggledy little series of interventions which don't form a proper whole, and that's why the housing market is a mess.
Do you think the big developers are too powerful, Mark? The House of Lords Select Committee has called them an oligopoly. Yes. Michael Gove has called them a cartel. They would, of course, deny that because that would be illegal.
So they've been massively helped by the Help to Buy scheme. That's not their fault. But what matters more than the 1% a year of houses that are built is the 99% of the stock that isn't. So too many old people don't move. They stay in a 4 or 5 bedroom house. They should be moving out and giving that to a family, and they don't move because of stamp duty. That's what they tell us.
Mark Bogard, really interesting. You're a genuine housing industry insider. You are chair of the Building Societies Association. It's really interesting to talk to you. And do come back here on The Money again soon.
Thank you.
There you go. Grown-up conversations with people who know their stuff. That's what we do here on this show. But for today, it's all we've got time for. Join me tomorrow at 1 p.m. Well, I'll be continuing my focus on this cost of living crisis, helping you to beat the squeeze. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan, and that was On The Money.
Hello, I'm Alex Deacon with your latest weather updates. Most places having a dry but fairly drab day today. Quite a lot of cloud across the country, but some spots seeing some sunshine, and temperatures continue to drop off after the extremes of earlier in the week. High pressure is moving in, but these weather fronts aren't too far away. They will influence things come the weekend. More on that in a moment. Today, though, under that high pressure, most places dry. Maybe just one or two showers here and there over the Pennines, drifting into northwestern parts of England, maybe southwest Scotland. Otherwise, as I say, most places dry and cloudy, but some sunny spells. West Wales, southwest England, northern parts of Scotland, the north coast of Northern Ireland, seeing a bit of sunshine. When the sun's out, temperatures getting up into the low to mid-20s across the south, but mostly we're only in high teens, low 20s territory. Through this evening, we'll see a few more showers developing, parts of the Midlands, southern Scotland, then eastern Scotland. And overnight, maybe some heavier showers starting to drift into the Midlands, parts of South Wales in particular. A reasonably warm night, not like earlier in the week, but temperatures in the south holding up in the mid-teens. And on Friday, there's the potential for some heavy downpours in places. It could be quite a damp start over the Midlands, parts of South Wales, and then we're looking at some scattered, heavy, thundery showers breaking out across parts of southern England, South Wales. The showers will be light across northern England, parts of Scotland, many places here dry, much of Northern Ireland dry, and the east coast also largely dry and fine. But again, there will be a lot of cloud and temperatures high teens, low 20s. Still a few of those heavy showers around on Friday evening. Could be dropping a lot of rain in a short space of time, so could cause a few issues, particularly so on the roads. As we go into the weekend, those weather fronts we talked about earlier out west will be moving in with low pressure, so some wet and increasingly windy weather to the northwest, but staying mostly dry and getting warm once more across parts of the southeast.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send